Uh, Welcome, everybody. I am Councilmember Chris Ray, and I'm going to call to order the July 11th, 2023 City Council Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. With me this evening are Deputy Council President Zach Hall and Councilmember Barbara D. Michelle. On the agenda this evening, we have just one item, which is ID 1444, the MetroFlex on-demand services, and we'll get to that in just a second. First on our agenda, though, is public comment, and there will be really two public comments. Opportunities. We'll do one right now, and then we'll have another public comment opportunity after staff has done their presentation and council question and answers. Members of the public may address the council this time either in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance to make comments will be called first. If you're joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, press *3. If you've joined by computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right corner. If you're in the room and did not sign up, I'll ask for speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. I'll wait a moment to see if anybody raises their hand. Anybody online, City Clerk?
Chair Ray, we do have a virtual attendee who has their hand raised.
Okay. Let's see what they have to say.
Katya Zakharov, I'm making you a panelist. You should now be able to turn on your video and speak to the committee.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Hi, I cannot find how to turn my video on, unfortunately. Hello, everyone. I'm Katya Zakharov, and I would like to speak to advocate for the MetroFlex service in Issaquah. I strongly believe that we actually need a very active metro service in our area, and I believe that MetroFlex will be the first step, at least, that will give many of our residents opportunity to not use their cars, but to use the public transportation. I've listened to this previous Transportation Advisory Board meeting, and I know their opinion, and I know that they have some questions there. And I actually took a moment and I did my small research on that. And my biggest thing is that many people have no idea that this service might be provided, or there are plans like that. So I think we need to increase the advertisement of the services so people know that they exist or they plan to exist. Unfortunately, only a small group of people who are really interested in what's going on the city council meetings or on the board meetings, only those people currently know what's going on. So, but I strongly advocate for that service to be available to the Issaquahans. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Katya. Is anybody else online?
Chair Ray, we have no other virtual attendees at this time.
And no one in the room is expressed a desire to speak at this point, so we will have another opportunity in a few moments. But for right now, let us jump into our agenda item. No, before we do that, let us talk about minutes from our last meeting. Any comments on the minutes? So I saw this the other day. It was without objection, we will approve the meetings unless there's objection. Can I do that, City Clerk?
You can do that.
Let's do that, because that sounds better than taking a vote. So if there's no objection, we'll consider the meetings from the June 13th meeting approved. All right, on to our regular business, our one agenda item, which is ID 1444, MetroFlex On Demand. And John Larson Friend, our transportation program coordinator, is going to be presenting with some help, I think, from King County Metro folks. John, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Ray. I appreciate it. Hope you can hear me. And good evening, council members. I'm very excited to be here. I'm John Larson Friend. I'm the Transportation Program Coordinator. I'm joined this evening by Meredith Sampson from King County Metro, as well as Brian Henry from King County Metro. We're here this evening to talk to you and provide information about the Metro Flex on-demand service. Our purpose this evening is to receive feedback on the proposed Metro Flex on-demand program. And the direction that we're looking for tonight is, should the city enter into an agreement to fund a Metro Flex expansion into Issaquah? So first, to just begin with a short little history lesson here, or reminder, more likely. An effort to bring neighborhood service has gone on for at least a decade. More recently, the history started in 2017 when the city applied for the Community Connections project or program. That program has since evolved over time into the MetroFlex system that we see today. In 2018, Issaquah was chosen for that project. A group or committee was formed and exploration efforts were initiated, and as well as some surveying, which I'll cover in a few minutes. In late 2019, the higher-ups at Metro asked the staff to reevaluate kind of the data that they were seeing just based back then, and they ended up putting the project on a brief hold. Well, what was supposed to be a brief hold because COVID-19 popped up in 2020, and Metro announced a lot of their services were going to be suspended. Late 2020, Metro announced adjusted priorities due to COVID-19, and in 2021, Metro ended up announcing the cancellation of Issaquah's integration into the Community Connections program. So since that time in 2021, so staff basically came back to council and asked, okay, what do we do now since we don't have access to this service anymore? And council, even back then, directed staff to keep pursuing that Metro partnership. It was also during that time that my position was created, the Transportation Program Coordinator, to basically explore any options that we might have for Squawk and Tallis neighborhoods specifically, going under the name Shuttle at the time. After I came aboard, we found out that Metro had put all pilot projects on pause until further notice. And so then I spent basically the time between March and September 2022 just trying to figure out what to do next. What are our options? I found three. The first one was wait for Metro. The second one was to fund our own system, which ended up being very cost prohibitive. And we also looked at some sort of Uber or Lyft subsidized service partnership. At that point, we were directed by council to basically keep pursuing Metro once again. That brings us up to last month and this month. Last month we presented Metro Flex to TAB, and now, of course, I'm here with you presenting on this information. Looking into the future, in September, we know that routes 214, 216, and 217 are going to be suspended due to lack of drivers, basically. And then hopefully in October 2023, the proposed Metro Flex service would begin. There has been extensive public outreach done around this issue, and I will cover that now. So going back to that, the group or committee that was formed back in 2018, as I mentioned before, a couple of surveys were a part of that effort. The surveys found that the most significant barrier to transit is the first mile, last mile issue. And just to quickly define that, first mile, last mile is the first or last portion of any transit trip, and is often a gap in that service, and is also often a barrier to ridership. We found that the top three things that would help people ride transit more often is transportation service when needed that connects to transit or local destinations, access to destinations not currently reached by bus, and tied for third was guaranteed ride home, low cost to rider, and knowledge/competence in transit. At that point, the group recommended two things. Peak ride, basically asking Metro to increase more bus routes during those peak commuting times, and an on-demand service. More recently, we also wanted to kind of catch up with the community. So in April of this year, we staff conducted a survey of the Squawk, Tallis, Issaquah Valley, and Old Town neighborhoods. We received 416 responses, which was great. We loved that. We found that transit use has gone down 20% since 2020, which is very much in line with national trends. But we also found that 65% of respondents would use transit if available within a block of their residence, which is massive. The top issues that arose were first mile, last mile issues, which is in line with the former survey. A lack of safety, familiarity, or comfort when riding, which is also in line with national trends. And difficulty understanding / planning around transit schedule. Now, this could mean one of two things. This could mean just we need more education, which is always needed around transit. Or it could just be people are looking at transit as an option and they can't get there, so they don't. So moving on to the direction that you gave us in 2022. So last year, when we presented these options to you, as the body, concluded that the administration should pursue a Metro pilot program partnership with King County Metro, which we have. So staff approached Metro, who evaluated the request. They determined that this is in fact aligned with their priorities and a good idea to pursue. So since then, staff and Metro have worked together to design and integrate an on-demand service into the community. It'll solve first mile, last mile gaps in current service and provide intra-city mobility to residents. And this is looking at those two priorities, not just connecting people to transit, but connecting residents to their city, essentially. Issaquah is also first on the list of communities being considered for MetroFlex service expansion. And I want to note that a huge reason why Metro even wants to partner with us at this point is that we at the city, based on past council discussions and direction, have expressed that we are willing to financially contribute, and we would not be considered for this program without that contribution. I also want to pause just for a second. Through my work in this position, there have been a couple of examples that have arisen that I wanted to kind of note. First, we recently had an employee with the city. She works, or she lives at the Anthology Apartments off Newport Way. She expressed that her partner and her have only one car. He's driving 50 miles plus to work. How do I get to City Hall? And I really, really wanted to tell her, we have this cool program, which we didn't. But instead, I had to tell her, basically, you got to walk a mile to the transit station, take the bus, or buy a bike. These are pretty okay options in weather like this, but of course we live in Washington, and it definitely becomes a barrier. We also have another example. A city staff member recently told me that he met a woman at the Issaquah Transit Center who had taken the 554 to Issaquah and then needed to get to a person's residence for their job doing in-home care. Again, we wish we could have told her, hey, just hop the MetroFlex and you'll get there. We're not actually sure how she got to her job. So looking at the contract really quickly, we want to summarize the contract because it is fairly extensive. So the agreement expires at the end of December 2025 for a service provided of a minimum of 2 years. The service would begin in October upcoming. It would operate Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Fares would also be a part of the ORCA system, which is huge. That point came up in tab last year when we presented. Of the 3 options that we gave them then, they were very concerned about options that didn't integrate into the ORCA system. The city would fund services at a cost of $262,000 a year, and performance data would be provided quarterly. So of course, as you all are probably aware, we took this topic to TAB last month, and we had basically a split down the middle. I do want to note that 3 members were absent. I, as the staff liaison, was not in the room due to having COVID, unfortunately. And it was also the same night as a city council meeting. And so we had, even the staff that were in the room had to run back and forth or not be there at all. So the proceedings were probably not as guided as, well, I would wish they had been. So looking at the feedback that we got from the PAB, the 3 opposed, they were concerned about service successes due to past outcomes, looking at Route 200 and other efforts, other services that have been provided and have since gone away. They were concerned about spending this amount of money on a pilot project. And they also requested more data from King County Metro, which since then, King County Metro has provided that data to us, and they'll talk about it here in a few minutes. So the 2 in favor, they were concerned that good mobility opportunities were being missed out on. One particular member was very concerned that, say, in 10 years or 5 years, the city would look back after looking for the perfect service and end up realizing, oh, the best service ended up being back in the. They also see the point-to-point service is very much needed in the community and fulfills the Taliesin Squawk priority. They also believe that the cost of the city, while it seems high, is very minimal for what service is provided. So with that, hand it over to Meredith to talk about the service itself.
Hey, John, before you turn it over,
Absolutely.
we have a couple of questions. Councilmember DiMichele?
So, John, just a couple of clarifications, and I did watch the Transportation Advisory Board meeting, so I asked you this before, but I want to be sure. And then I thought of a second question to go along with it. The first question is, if you are a Taos resident, would you be able to book a ride to Sammamish? Because the service area, I think, was not as clear as it could have been. And the second question is, if you are a Sammamish resident, would you be able to book a ride to Taos? Question.
Yes and yes.
Thank you. So it's really an expansion of the current service that is already being offered in Sammamish. And I think there was a lot of confusion about that. And the maps that we got, it looked like it was 2 different services, but it's really one big service area that we're talking about. Okay. And then I did have the other question was, because I believe Mr. Henry had talked about it is on-demand service, so I wanted to be clear about the $262,000 that we would be obligated to pay that, whether or not we had robust ridership, or that would be our we're not going to be paying on a per ride basis, is what I'm getting at.
Yes, and I have a section about that because I'll come back and kind of wrap things
Okay.
up. And I wanted to, I'll mention it here now since you're asking. The way that the contract is set up, it really protects Issaquah against fluctuation because there is expected growth from this service as opposed to shrinking. So it would create a stopgap, for lack of a better word, that would basically, this is how much Issaquah is paying, no matter what happens with the service.
Okay, all right. So I think those were the 2 big questions that I wanted to be sure that we were really clear about, that we were talking about this one big area and we are talking about an investment of $262,000. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Second? Okay.
Okay. Meredith.
Hi, everybody. I'm Meredith Sampson, a transportation planner with King County Metro and their service planning group with a focus on East King County. Here to continue the conversation about MetroFlex. So a really quick agenda. I'm going to kind of give an overview of MetroFlex, what it is, how it operates, where it operates, how to use the service, and a little bit on the proposed partnership with the City of Issaquah before I hand it to John. So starting off with just the role of MetroFlex generally. So for the last several years, Metro was operating on-demand services through a few different vendors. And in March, we consolidated all of the on-demand services to one vendor, and the service is now called MetroFlex. This service is open to the general public, and the main premise is that people can use this service to book a ride, an on-demand trip from any point in the service area to any other point in the service area, in the same service area. Riders can request a ride on demand using either the app, our call center, or our website. Riders designate a start destination and an end destination for the ride, and they're given an ETA for the driver to arrive. And then they're instructed to walk to a nearby pickup location, usually the nearest cross street, to catch the ride. This will all be shown in the app or directed by the operator at the call center or through the website. The rider then gets in the MetroFlex vehicle, which may be a shared ride. The algorithm does share rides for efficiency reasons. And the average wait time for a ride is about 15 minutes across service areas right now. It's actually a little less in nearby service areas, but across the system, 15-minute ETA is the average. When a rider books a ride, they can designate in their profile whether or not they need a wheelchair accessible vehicle. And the profile will then remember that for future rides. And the same when you call or use the website, you create a profile and that will be remembered for all future rides. Interpreter services are also available to book rides for people. So that is another accessibility feature for us. One thing I wanted to emphasize about this, and John kind of touched about this, is that it is integrated with Orca and it is the same fare as a bus. So you can pay with Orca, you can pay with a Transit Go ticket, and you can pay through the app with a credit card. You cannot pay with cash or with paper transfer just due to safety and operational reasons, but you can load money onto your Orca card with cash or pay. There are certain vendors where you can load, buy Transit Go tickets with. So there's options. Okay, here is a map of the current MetroFlex service areas. There are 7 of them. There's Juanita, Sammamish, Kent, Othello, Rainier Beach / Skyway, Renton Highlands, and Tukwila. King County is very large area-wise, different land uses and densities, as you all know. So you can see these service areas are kind of in different areas. With some of them are much more dense, some of them are more suburban type densities. And putting service in different areas like this is really helping us learn a lot about where the service does best and where it just makes sense as a mobility solution. And part of the learning opportunity for a service area in Issaquah will be monitoring how this service impacts the local fixed route network in the next 2 years and just kind of seeing what the right size mobility solution for Issaquah is. Okay, so this slide shows how the existing Sammamish service area is performing as of the week of June 18th. So this is the data that was requested in the Transit Advisory Board meeting that John mentioned. And we want to provide you with this, just you might be wondering like some context for the service, how it's performing. Sammamish is the closest service area. So this is what the metrics look like as of June 18th. You can see the service is averaging 2.3 rides per vehicle hour. That cost per ride is not the cost to the rider, that's on the back end. The cost to the rider is the same fare as a bus. The average wait time is 10 minutes. Average travel time is 9.4 minutes. And one thing that I do want to mention is that we've seen really consistent growth in the Sammamish service area over the past year, even when we transitioned to a different operator, like to a new service operator into MetroFlex. Ridership increased 193% June 2022 to June 2023. So significant growth there. So it's doing really well in Sammamish.
Mayor, the quick question.
Yeah.
Councilmember Hall.
Really quickly, can you remind me how many flex vehicles serve Sammamish?
How many vehicles are there? So it's actually a demand-based system across all of our service areas.
Okay.
So on average, at any given time, there's probably 2 to 3 in Sammamish right now. But if there's a lot of demand, more vehicles from across the other service areas will go to Sammamish. And
If there's higher demand at Sammamish, one might come up.
yes.
Okay.
Yep. And likewise, if there's less demand, they could go somewhere else. But since Sammamish is further out, it's not grouped close by with a lot of the other service areas. There usually are about 2 to 3 that are kind of stay around the area right now. Okay, so one thing we're seeing across service areas is that the top destinations that riders are using MetroFlex to travel to is a transit hub, whether that be a park and ride or a transit center or whatnot. So this shows that riders are using the service to connect to the greater transit network, which is one of our goals for MetroFlex. We want to make sure we're giving that first last mile connection, like John mentioned, and connecting people to the transit network who don't have access now. This map is a heat map showing the top origin and drop-off destinations for Sammamish. You can see there's the Issaquah Highlands Park and Ride, QFC, middle school, but also highlighted on this heat map, you'll see the hospital. There's people are using this to get around, but the top location is that park and ride right now. So we expect with this zone expanded to include a larger portion of Issaquah, including the Squawk and Tallis neighborhoods, to see riders connecting to the Issaquah Transit Center, as well as the destinations you see here and all the other community assets that would be included with the expanded portion. If there's no other questions for me right now, I'll hand it back to John.
Yep. Councilmember Hall.
I just thought of this,
Yeah.
and it's just completely out of curiosity. Are they all gas-powered vehicles or electric vehicles?
I believe we are, I think there's a, Brian, do you know?
Okay, that was going to be my question, was whether or not kind of long-term.
Oh, sorry, I'll
Future, we'll
repeat
be testing electric vehicles. There's a plan for that.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, back to
Okay,
John.
Back to John.
Thank you, Meredith. Appreciate it. So I'm back to talk about the Issaquah service area. A few notes. We wanted to note that this service area, it connects the Squawk and Tallis neighborhoods and former Route 200 service area. And I'm going to go with plus, since everything is plus these days. This serves an incredible amount of Issaquah. And I also want to mention, technically, MetroFlex is already serving Issaquah because it is already serving Providence Point and Issaquah Highlands, or at least that main area of Issaquah Highlands. I also want to mention that it'll serve central Issaquah as well as many common destinations. It will connect to important transit centers, as we've noted, and as we've talked about a little bit, it'll connect to the Sammamish service area. Of course, as I mentioned, accessibility to transit and local businesses will be a part of this system, but it also specifically provides access to medical services, including Swedish Hospital and natural areas. You'll probably remember that the Trailhead Connect no longer serves the Issaquah locations. It'll provide Sammamish residents with access to Issaquah businesses, which is great for economic development. And we have worked to include apartments and lower income areas of Issaquah and access to Lake Sammamish State Park. I also want to note that this does fulfill several goals of the Mobility Master Plan. So let's just touch on funding here. So the Metro budget for the entire service area at this point is $644,000. The Issaquah contribution is $263,000. Early in the planning process, we looked at having two distinct service areas, but came to the conclusion that a combined service area would serve all the demand in the area, assume that growth is going to happen, and would create a much more equitable and efficient and cost-efficient service area. With thinking about the funding in mind, we approached Metro on your recommendation and offered to pay for the service because we know that it's such a high priority of council to connect our neighborhoods. It provides access to parts of Issaquah not ever served by transit, including Squawk and Tallis neighborhoods. And as I mentioned before, the funding agreement and the contract protects Issaquah from fluctuations in costs. And we believe is a commitment to Issaquah as a priority area, needs area for this. So moving into wrapping up the presentation, our next steps, hopefully, would be to finalize and approve the contract. We would lead into a 2-year pilot with an estimated launch of October of this year. We would receive quarterly reporting on performance, so we would actively monitor to see if we are getting everything that we hope to get out of it. And Metro will evaluate the service based on their service guidelines, which includes equity, productivity, which is the rides per hour, and efficiency, which is the cost per ride. And again, just to wrap up, tonight we are looking for direction on whether the city should enter into an agreement to fund a Metro Flex expansion into Issaquah. Very much.
Great. Thanks, John. Great presentation. Thank you, Meredith. I know there must be questions. Deputy Council President, do you want to go?
Sure. I have one question. Most of my questions were answered pre-meeting, so thank you. But I was actually wondering if Metro could speak to kind of what's your long-term vision for Metro Flex? Is the idea to continue to grow the program and kind of regionalize it in the area, or are you being selective about what communities you think this program would fit in nicely? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are kind of long-term with Metro Flex.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Right now, it's really twofold. We're in a big learning phase, like Meredith mentioned. We learn different things in different service areas, and that really helps us actually make little changes as we need to like help the service perform better. So a lot of it is still continuing to learn, while at the same time having a consistent brand that's out there that people can count on and understand. In our service guidelines, we also have kind of priorities for where we believe that these services make sense. And so you can check that out, but basically they include looking at equity, looking at increasing access to jobs and community assets, and making sure that we're hitting the kind of the right density. So while Meredith mentioned that there's a big range, it could be problematic to go to a very rural area because it would be very spread out. And then similarly, in a very dense area, you have a lot of transit. Fixed route transit works really well in many places that are very dense. So that's kind of the what we look at as how to prioritize these services right now. Oh, and of course, partnerships is another priority thing. So looking for people who are interested in working with us, and this is a good example of that.
Barb, any questions? Oh, I have a couple. And you mentioned that there is a vendor that's providing the service, and I was just curious who they were and if they provide similar services in other locations and where those might be.
The vendor is Via. Via is the name, and they provide similar services. Well, they are the original vendor that was providing our on-demand services in Tukwila and Othello, and several of the other service areas, but they do also provide similar on-demand services in other locations across the country. Don't know exactly which cities
I did not.
No, I do know they do, but I'm not sure where.
Yeah, we can follow up with that
Yes.
information after.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we need that for now, but it would be interesting to know where they are providing services and kind of what their experience has been in some other locations too, just to give us a richer sample set of the effectiveness of the program. But my other question deals with them. Are the vehicles and the operators Metro employees or Via employees?
They are Via employees.
Okay, and Via owns the vehicles?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So I have this really bizarre question, which is, what happens if I'm using the service and I enter either a beginning destination or an ending destination that is outside of the service area? Do we go to the service area border? Do we just not respond?
I believe in the app, if you tried to do that, you would get an error message. You have to start and end the ride within the service area.
And then the hours of service that we would do would be identical to what Sammamish is doing, so it would be an integrated whole. It wouldn't be two things. I think that is all I had. Okay, I think we're good for now. We'll open it up for, nice job. We'll open it up for any additional public comment. If there's anybody online who would like to speak at this time, we'd love to hear from you. pause for a second.
Chair Ray, I don't see any virtual hands raised
Okay.
among our online attendees at this time.
I will scan the room to look for real hands raised, and I don't see any there. So we'll move on to comments and guidance and deliberation. Barbara, you want to start us off? I know you've got strong feelings.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So I wanted to appreciate, first of all, the history that John provided for us. And I think if we think about all of the planning that we've done, we've got a comprehensive plan and a strategic plan and a master mobility plan and a climate action plan. And in each one of those, increased transit and increased transit choices are part of the planning that we've been doing for a long time. So, and in addition to that, I wanted to also acknowledge, and I think John touched on this, that that the Tallis and Squawk areas, we do have two priority populations in the Issaquah area, and this proposed route or service would be an excellent thing to have available for those priority populations. And especially for our senior citizens, our low-income housing residents. We've got a lot of immigrants, and I was really pleased to hear that there's a translation service available. And for disabled individuals in Issaquah, all of those people really need transit services, and we've had not enough available for them. So I think that the service, by expanding it from Sammamish, and I'm really glad to hear that we've heard for years people, why don't we have a transit? Why don't we have a bus that goes to Sammamish? And so now they will be able to have that opportunity. And then the area that we're looking at for the Issaquah part of that expansion is much bigger than I think we envisioned originally. When we first started talking to Metro about this, it was really a kind of a back and forth to the transit center. This is much, much more a desirable service proposal. So I know that the Transportation Advisory Board was very concerned about the cost, and it is kind of shocking sometimes. Brian knows the transit service is expensive. It is expensive, and thank you for the breakdown that you gave it. Most of it goes to the ride, or to the bus driver and to the personnel that we're hiring, and that's a hard cost to get around. And so that 262,000, I know it seems to be a large number, but on the other hand, we are going to have access to buses and a bus system that's already in place that will give us access to a much, much wider area of service. So I feel like we're making a very appropriate investment in that. And finally, I just want to say that I am so pleased, and Brian and Meredith, thank you so much for coming forward with this proposal, and for us being the first. That is really exciting, and I think that is we want to commend John very much for the discussions that you've been having for Metro, with Metro for quite some time. I personally agree with the TAB members who are concerned that if we pass this opportunity up, we may not be getting another opportunity for a long, long time. Metro certainly does not lack for communities that want the service. So I think that we have a proposal on the table. It's something we've been asking for a long time. It's not only us as a council that's been asking, our community very obviously has been asking over and over and over again. Latest community survey, what was one of the top things that they wanted? Better transit connections. It always ends up there at the top of that community survey. So we've heard it over and over again. So I will be supporting giving not a red light, a green light, a green light to this right, exactly, the green light to this pilot project, because I think, and again, it fits not only into what we've been asking for a long time, but it also fits into our long-range plans for future transit growth. So I can see it being part eventually of a robust transit system here in Issaquah. So altogether, I just don't see any downsides. I think this is an excellent proposal, and thanks to everybody who's put it together. That's it.
Great, thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Deputy President, yes, please.
Yeah, I'll come in next. First, just to echo Councilmember DiMichele, definitely want to thank staff for their determination over the years, keeping this a priority for the city, for Transportation Advisory Board for their engagement and connection in this work ever since it started, for Metro for coming back to the table, for your partnership with the city. Thank you for being willing and available to work with us. So appreciate it. You know, this has been a priority of the council, the administration, TAB, and the community for a very long time. It continues to show up in community surveys. Even at one of our most recent listening sessions in Tallis, it came up several times from Tallis residents who feel stranded up there. As staff has pointed out, traffic's likely to worsen in the next couple of years due to WASDOT projects like culverts and SR 18. So this could be a solution for some. I see it very similar in my mind to the electric scooter pilot program, thinking of how can we solve the last mile, first mile problem for some people. I definitely understand and want to acknowledge the questions and concerns that were brought up at the Transportation Advisory Board around cost, around data, around what success looks like. I think this council has demonstrated that it's very receptive to funding pilot projects and pilot programs in the city. And this is definitely, I would categorize as a pilot project, even though it's not written in the title. I actually wonder if when it comes back to the full council, we can include pilot in the title or something like that. But yeah, we like pilot projects, especially when they're aligned with our goals, with supporting equity, when the market isn't responding to a need. And we have honestly a pretty decent track record in investing in pilot programs that end up working really well. Here in Issaquah, looking at homelessness outreach, behavioral health and crisis response, emergency housing, which is just getting off the ground now. And I also think it's notable that Metro is contributing nearly 2.5 times more than the city would too. You know, thinking about some of the Sammamish data too, I'm feeling pretty certain that that Sammamish model is a good baseline for success here in Issaquah. I had this conversation with our deputy city administrator earlier today too. You know, our data I think should probably report at least what Sammamish is reporting. I would imagine we would get some more there, and to me, even that baseline is worth the cost of piloting this project. The Sammamish data also shows that riders are, you know, accessing these transit hubs and other important needs like grocery stores, schools. And as we heard in Sammamish, the program is growing too, or ridership is growing too, which is fantastic. So we know that it'll be used well, or we have a good comparable to say it'll probably be used well here in Issaquah. There's always a risk with pilot programs, right? And we just have to decide whether the risk is worth it. But, you know, as Tab pointed out too, we do need to take performance monitoring and performance eval very seriously. It's an important element of the agreement, getting the data for us to do that work, and we'll have access to that data. And I also do think that it would behoove us also to compare with marketplace metrics like those of Uber and Lyft and say, okay, cost per rider at the end of this, what are we looking at? Is it a lot more expensive? Is it on par? Is it less? I think that would be a good data point for us to review. I think also just zooming out, this is a good opportunity to grow the program and to drive efficiencies from Metro's lenses too, and promote greater regionalization and regional participation. You know, we're one more service area or adding on to an existing service area. We're actually the first on the expansion list, which I agree is very exciting, probably because we were sitting there at the door knocking this whole time, please. I also think that this is an opportunity to show Metro and the community and cough, cough, sound transit, cough, cough, that we are serious about transit here in Issaquah, and the community is serious about having options of getting around town that aren't single occupancy vehicle trips. And I worry that, you know, turning back now might close the door on a potential partnership with Metro too. So I think that this is our shot to experiment, to evaluate outcomes, to meet goals, to show the community that we hear them. So yeah, I think we should move forward with the proposal. We have the necessary resources to make it happen. I think what we'd likely get is worth the cost. I want to make sure we capture all the comments and questions and concerns, both from TAB, anything we've heard from the community, and then this committee, and as it moves up to council, and make sure we have that documented for when we start doing performance evaluations. We can consider all the comments and concerns that have been brought up already, and yeah, use that to determine next steps. So again, thank you to everyone for putting this together, and yeah, I'm supportive.
Thanks. I have a couple of comments and then some thoughts too. One is Squawk and Talus have had this need for some time, and I live in Talus, and I, was that that person taking up a spot at the park and ride for an awful lot of days going into downtown. So I liked having an alternative to that. I think it's also very interesting, the notion that if I'm a one-car family and the other part of the family has the car, then I'm kind of stranded if I'm in some of these places. So that's very interesting to me. The idea of tacking on to the existing Sammamish service area is great. It provides some economies of scales and clearly will be more efficient. When we talked about vans having to come in from another place if we had peak needs, this will help spread some of that. I got to tell you, when I was a youngster, I had a job and I took the bus to my job, and it was literally a mile from my job, and so I had to schlep that last mile, and I was desperate for a job, so I did it. But it would have been sure cool to have had an option like this at that time. So I'm kind of feeling some pain in that right now. Well, the other thing that I kind of like, and I know the TAB talked about, was this just a solution for first mile, last mile, or was this something bigger than that? And there was a little bit of angst about it being something bigger than that. And I actually think when I looked at the community survey that we did, not only connection to transit, but intra-city mobility was a high priority. So it really does help us address a couple of these important goals for the city. Now, on the downside, I think we need a more robust, and I think council members DeMichelle and Hall spoke to this. We need a more robust set of success criteria and measurements. So when it comes back to full council for next steps, something with the three Metro ones of equity, productivity, and efficiency, all super important, but I would really like to see us to have some more data. For instance, we're really not reducing the number of single occupancy vehicles. Just because the driver is there, it's still a single occupancy. So I'd like to see some data on how much ride sharing we can do, so that if I'm picking up 2 people on the route, that's where we start to see bang for buck, as opposed to I'm just Uber Light. So I would like to see some additional criteria, what we think is really important and how we would measure that. So all in all, the cost is steep, but I think that and Deputy Council President said this, if it's a pilot, let's give it a shot. Let's see how it goes. It's a partnership with Metro, and we can evaluate whether or not we think we're getting the value from it that we really are hoping. So I think it's the right thing to do moving forward, but I would like you to spend a little time thinking about how else we might measure success on this program and come back with some ideas, and I will also spend a little more time thinking about that and give you my thoughts on what success criteria could look like too. Councilmember DeMichelle.
I just want to add a little bit more and acknowledge the comments from Katya Zakharov. And I do think that people in Issaquah, we've been a while now when we haven't had the Route 200, and so I think communications are going to be really important, and I know Metro has a superb communications department, but I would say I think we could help them out by also really advertising what the options are and how to do it, and maybe have some workshops or whatever. But we won't design a communications program right here, but the idea would be to get people to really understand that it's really pretty easy to book one of these rides, and how to do it and how to be comfortable doing it and so forth, and maybe address the safety issues that were brought up in that last survey too. So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, communication is going to be really, really important.
All right, I want to pile on communications because it was in my notes and I skipped right over the top of it. But promoting the service is going to be hugely important. If no one knows about it, no one will use it, and word of mouth isn't going to do it. So when we come back to the next time we see this one, having some more words about how we're going to get the word out if we do it would be really, really helpful. And another thought, and it'll come back to me later, and I will get back to you. But Zach, you want to help me and talk for a while?
Yeah, sure. Well, I just had some thoughts about like maybe we as a committee can take some time and think about how we want success defined. So in the contract, it talks about the different data that we'd be collecting, and like you were talking about, you know, we don't want to just promote more single occupant vehicle, and that's totally right. And I think one of the data points is percent ride sharing, because in Sammamish, percent ride sharing was like 71% or something, if I remember right. So do we want to, like, before we press go and have the green light, do we want to set goals for each of these particular data points, or do we just want to collect what we think? And I'm just curious what the council thinks, or the administration that had been kind of, or even Metro, is that something other communities have done? Kind of think about like, let's set goals going into this and measure success based on those. Maybe we could start with Andrew. Go from there. And if any council wants, they can jump.
Thank you. Great questions. And I also appreciate council brainstorming other ideas that you would like to see for performance measurement. One of the things that I think we can add to that list that would be helpful is understanding where the boardings occur. So this is data that Metro can pull. You saw an example of that data for Sammamish. And number one location was the park and ride. So that lets us know that people are not driving to the park and ride, for example. That encourages use of the transit connections from our transit centers. And so I think that data would be helpful for city purposes as well in terms of getting out education. I also thought it was particularly interesting that the number 3 location was Beaver Lake Middle School. So that may help us in our efforts in terms of where we can provide these educational campaigns and that type of outreach. But in terms of reducing SOV trips and that goal, we have a couple of ways at getting at this data. Not all of it can be done through what Metro naturally collects with this service. And so some of it includes the regular surveying that we do as we track this metric of SOV trips. And so part of that is other performance data that we track, and we can see, does this move the needle? Are we seeing differences in our rideshare modes across the city as we get more data from our own data collection efforts and PSRC as well? So there's other ways to track some of this data than what Metro can necessarily directly provide, but certainly even things like destinations or the locations of the boardings, I think is something that is useful and that Metro can provide for us. We may want to add that to the contract. Other ideas I would look to Metro for to help us track SOV trips or mode share. If they're naturally collecting this data, it would be good to find out what other type of data they can provide us that we can use. Brian or Meredith, do you have other thoughts on data that Metro already collects but that can provide with this service?
Well, you mentioned the shared ride percentage, so that's something we track across all the areas. Another sustainability measure that we have for all areas is passenger miles to vehicle miles. It's a metric that we work to make sure like we have as many passenger miles per vehicle mile, right, as we can. And I think also like rides per hour is showing that you're carrying more people in a vehicle. So that's in a way, even though it's like how productive is the vehicle being used, it's also like, are you carrying a lot of people when a vehicle is driving around for an hour? So like that's kind of a measure, although not as closely as those. So those are 3 measures that we use, and you mentioned one of them. So Yeah.
So I have one question, and then I have a comment for you. What's the funding source? So it's $500,000 over a biennium. Have we identified where we think that would come from?
We are, it would come from a general fund revenue source. So we don't have any other specified revenue sources at this time. It is something that we are trying to identify. It also potentially could be something that would be funded by a transportation benefit district revenue source. So as we discuss more about the TBD and as we get our revenue projections and discuss the mid-biennium budget adjustments, should this committee approve for further consideration of this contract, then I think we would have to take a look at those potential revenue sources and identify where this would come from. The contract, as it is right now, the proposed contract would have service beginning in the fall, which would mean a 1 quarter essentially of invoicing and payments that we would need to identify for the 2023 year. Otherwise, we have a little bit of time to identify where else we could get the revenue from to pay for the service for 2024 and the rest of the contract.
Thank you. Well, I have a couple thoughts on the measurements, and I haven't done this, and I probably should have, but we should go back to the strategic plan and the goals and outcomes in the strategic plan, particularly around mobility, and use those as an anchor for the measurements we want to have. So if we're talking about reducing single occupancy trips, we should measure that. If we're talking about expanding transit, we should talk about the number of people we're taking to transit locations. So anchor our metrics back into the strategic plan outcomes that we identified. So it gives us kind of a traceability from here were our high level goals, here are our objectives, and here's the metrics that show whether or not or to what degree this investment, this pilot is supporting those out.
Which would fit with our dashboard.
Yes.
It could be something we could report to the public as part of the reporting we already do on the strategic plan.
And I would just offer, yes, great. And that's something that we can, more information we can bring back for the next council meeting in consideration of this topic. I would also state that some of these things are performance measures and some of them are outcome related, right? And so outcomes being a little bit longer term, we collect that data a little differently. And so we have in the contract what performance data we can get from Metro that would be reported on a quarterly basis. But some of these things, like overall change in percentage of mode share, are more outcome and longer term. So we would maybe track that on a different schedule, an annual schedule we would update it, for example, versus a quarterly schedule of performance metrics that Metro has. And so just wanted to note that some of these things we already track and report in our dashboard, like mode share, like reduction in SOV trips or VMT. So this some of the data that we would want to look at is kind of overlapping with what we would already collect in some instances.
Yes. And I think that there are some proxies out there that we can use to say, I think if we see success in this proxy measure, we would also move the measure, say, in share of single occupancy vehicles, even though it may not reflect itself in any meaningful way in the short term. I think there are some things that we look at as performance measures that we can collect that can be indicators that we are moving some of our more global outcome measures. Zach?
Yeah, no, I'm loving this conversation. So do you think this can be detailed more in the memo before the next council touch, just so everyone, all the other along for the ride in that? And then is the idea that we would have identified a funding source by that next touch?
Yes.
And when are we thinking we would want to bring this back?
It is, we would anticipate bringing it back for that first regular city council meeting in August. I believe the date is August 7th. So between then, we have a couple of conversations scheduled with City Council, including next week. We have a conversation on Transportation Benefit District. We also have a conversation coming up on July 24th about a follow-up from that April retreat on what types of things Council would like to prioritize for the mid-biennium budget adjustment. So those two conversations we anticipate before the August 7th meeting.
All right, anything else?
Last thing too, just on behalf of hopefully on behalf of the committee too. I was wondering if you could communicate back to TAB too and just let them know. I mean, we always feel uncomfortable going against the recommendation of our community boards and commissions. But I think, the council were very receptive, like I said, to pilot projects, and we think that this cost is worth the potential outcome. And I'm hoping this can be communicated back to TAB, that we really appreciate their feedback, and it's going to be, included in the performance eval and how we track success, and if all that could just.
Yeah, as the new liaison to TAB, I've made that a top priority. I have a spreadsheet. So I've already communicated that we are coming here, which Dave is here tonight. And we will continue to let them know about discussions and outcomes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, they raised some very good questions, and I think we got some better data tonight in a better understanding of the project through the questions that were raised. So I also want to thank the Transportation Advisory Board for their discussion and for the questions that they raised. It is always good to be able to answer, everything that people are concerned about. So, and as we go forward, love to have their additional input. So thanks to Dave for being here tonight. So.
All right, anything else? My computer just restarted itself. Do we have a good of the order on the agenda?
Announcements, Chair Ray.
Announcements, any announcements from the committee?
Yes, the Regional Transit Committee is going to have a really interesting meeting this month. We're going to the South Base to tour the electrification of the fleet. So it's going to be really interesting, and it's an in-person meeting, no video. You have to be there or not, and so wear walking shoes. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a good experience. So anyway, and I'll be happy to report back what we find out. But I think it's going to be a really great look at Metro's efforts to begin the electrification of the fleet. So it'll be great.
Very exciting. We want to hear back from you. All right, any other announcements? All right, no further business. We are adjourned at 7:34.